So welcome, Jack, to our podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Nan. Appreciate being here.
Let's start out with who was or were your greatest influencers growing up?
Well, the greater influence was my father, who was a civic activist in Toledo, Ohio. And he was really king of our neighborhood of about 4 square blocks. And the story that I tell is to illustrate that, is that we contracted for our garbage pickup. And at one point, they contracted with a firm, the neighborhood did, and the firm would pick up the garbage very early in the morning. It would wake up all the dogs in the neighborhood, and the dogs would wake up my father. And he didn't like that. So he decided that he called the woman who ran the firm, and she said, no, there's no way we can do it differently. He said, fine. So he went to every house in 4 square blocks and got them to switch to another company whose owners, when he said to him, would you come at the time I specified, he says, mister, you get all those people. I'll come anytime you want. So he got 4 square blocks to shift to a different company. And what I remembered as a kid, it was the woman who owned the first company coming to our home and standing on the front lawn and saying words to my father I didn't think women knew. So he was a big influence. Another influence was my early experience as a police reporter in Ohio. As a kid growing up in a middle-class family, you don't see, I had a friend in high school who was black, but you don't see poor people very much. And as a reporter, I was going to neighborhoods and seeing the way a lot of people lived. And that really got to me. And as a result, I joined the Democratic Party. And I decided that rather than keeping on being a journalist, there were things to be done in the world. And so when I got the chance to go to Washington with the congressman, I jumped at it. And that started the major part of my career.
How did that opportunity come about? I mean,
again, you always have mentors. You always have people who believe in you, and that's the only way you get someplace. And the dean of my college, whose name was Sullivan, no relation, obviously, was like me a lot. And he was very liberal. In fact, he was sometimes called the Red Dean of Marquette. And he, the congressman, was looking for a press secretary, and he got in touch with the dean, and the dean got in touch with me. And then it just faded out that I could do the press secretary and be his top assistant as well. So I did them both. And I did that for quite a few years. Again, the congressman turned out to be another mentor for me. So you always get places because someone gives you a push.
A push or a hand out, that you take.
Not a push, really a hand, right.
And we all need those mentors in our lives.
Absolutely.
At some point in our time.
I once met a man who told me he was self-made, that he didn't, and I said, you're a fool. You don't know what you're talking about. Nobody gets there all by themselves.
That's the truth.
You need help.
Now, you've had a very interesting and varied career. What do you consider as some of the high points or achievements of your career?
Well, if you, the highest point was when it was in the international field, was when the world faced a possible food shortage. In the late 70s, there was a book written called Famine 1978. And the new grains had come along, the Green Revolution. And I was in a position, being head of Asia Bureau. My bureau was the largest purchaser of fertilizer in the world. And I put every dime I could into growing food, as well as into family planning, so that on both sides of the equation, we were taking care of people, but not going to experience so much of a population boom. And some of it succeeded pretty well. In fact, on the population side, Bangladesh, which was one of the countries I worked with, has now come almost to replacement in their birthing. So that's marvelous. In fact, I could never expect it. I spent my time walking around the slums of Bangladesh trying to avoid mothers-in-law who wanted as many kids as they could have, and the wives didn't. So that was an experience.
When you refer to a green revolution, is that what I heard you say?
Correct.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, that in the early 1970s, new grains in wheat and rice that get much more yield to the acre than the traditional grains were developed, but they needed to get to the farmers, and particularly the farmers of Asia. The Asian farmers took to it like mad. They really did. And it meant that there has not been a shortage. In those days, there was going to be an absolute shortage of food. Not that one country wouldn't have enough food, but worldwide, there would not be sufficient food. That didn't happen. And it has never happened since. That these grains and the further genetic and scientific advances have meant that the food production has continued to meet the demands of population, which is important.
Which is very important, and something that we need to look at today, I'm sure, in many areas.
Well, if we get by that, I also get down to development and housing. I also negotiated the housing guarantee program of USAID with a man, Manmohan Singh, who later became Prime Minister of India. He became a friend, and that program became the largest housing program that USAID had in the world. So it was that was kind of that was easy in some sense, because I had Dr. Singh and I had established a very pleasant relationship, and he understood what a benefit this would be immediately. He's very smart, and that worked out well. I've also been a civic activist. I have been in Alexandria. I have been since 1976 or so. I've been on 11 boards and commissions of the city, appointed by the mayor, sometimes the city manager, sometimes by somebody else, and they have run the gamut from being the chair of picking the poet laureate to being czar of cable television for a while, and then lots of development-related activities. I was thinking of about 3 of them. We transferred the responsibility for a very large piece of land in Alexandria, a very nice piece of land, from the Army. It was called Cameron Station. It was a military base, and it was transferred to civilian control in a development on the land back in the I guess 1980s. And I was on that board for 7 years. It took us 7 years to work out the details, but the end product wasn't exactly what we had worked on, but we got immense amount of parkland out of it for the city. It's one of the loveliest parks in the city, and we got recreation. Two parks. The second park is a ball fields and a recreation park, and that's the development is one of the best in the city. So I'm proud of that. But I had plenty of help on that one. The other one I was thinking about, we had another large plot of land that was unoccupied, and that one was unoccupied, and someone was going to build a huge plaza. It's very uneven terrain, and we're going to cut down all the trees and build a huge concrete plaza around which there would be 6 or 7 buildings of about 12 to 15 stories. It looks like something out of an Italian movie. And at the Seminary Hill Association at their annual meeting decided that this was something they wanted. So they said, would you do something? And I said, I can't promise. So it never got built. And one of the primary reason is and this is something I think anybody that wants to be a civic activist has got to do, which is to look at the documents very carefully and look at everything that's there. And I found that the artist who had drawn the development had drawn it and placed it geographically right on top of a major park. He had missed the site by several hundred yards, and so I waited my turn, and when I came before the Planning Commission, I simply pointed out that this seemed a little hasty to put this on what's called Fort Ward. It was a former fort in the Civil War. It's got a great historic value. It's a beautiful piece of land. Anyway, so I then had to go. I traveled overseas a lot, and I was overseas during the interim period. When I got back, it was coming up for city council. It had been appealed to the city council. So I didn't have a chance to see what the lawyer had done with the site, whether he had corrected the map. And I took a chance that he hadn't. And I asked the council to look at the map, and he had not changed it. And they looked at the map and went, "Oh, this seems a little hasty." And they turned him down. And we won the fight, which I had really thought might not be winnable. But by looking at everything, just looking at the documents, it became clear that it was a hastily done job, and that I don't think you can recover from something like that if you put the development on the wrong place. I just think that doesn't work.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
That was a good one. The third one, Alexandria historically has had a mixed sewer system, and we throw lots of sewage into the Potomac River. We've been throwing about, by city's own estimate, about 11.3 million tons of raw sewage in the Potomac every year. Yes. And this happened just a couple of years, right in contemporary time. And the city manager appointed me to the task force of citizens to look at it. And I did, my wife and I had done some earlier work in trying to get the signage. There was signage for the people fishing to say, if there is a heavy rainfall, don't fish here because it's nasty. But the point was that anytime we had to sprinkle we had sewage coming out of these pipes. There were 3 different places where these were used. So we got the signs changed. So I think as a result of that, the city manager decided that he should put me on this task force. And we looked at it, and they decided that they weren't going to do what was called outflow number 1, which was the major problem. About 50% of this sewage, raw sewage, was coming from one place, but they weren't going to deal with it. They were going to deal with the other 2. So I kept saying, I'm not happy with this. This isn't. And I kept asking, well, when would you get at this? Well, the year they gave me basically started out with something like 2040. They were going to deal with getting rid of this. In the meantime, of course, the district was spending billions to get rid of its overflows like this and get them in the Potomac. So I said I wasn't happy. And when it came to getting a final report out, being from Capitol Hill, I filed a minority report. And I asked some of my fellow members if they wouldn't join me. I said, I'll negotiate language. I'm not trying to grandstand this. Nobody would join me. However, it got published rather widely, the fact that we weren't going to do anything about all this sewage coming out of outflow number 1. And as a result, a downstream state senator who was an acquaintance of ours decided that he would take to the state legislature. And the state legislature ruled that Alexandria had to fix this problem with all of the outflows by 2025. So it's going to cost my neighbors and me and our water bills and the people of Alexandria, I suspect somewhere around $800 million in the next few years. But we will have taken care of a major problem. And so there has been a lot of, for the first time in my life, I've been a member of the Democratic Party and pretty active for years. I actually got a standing ovation from the Democrats for this work, which I was very pleased with. So then the next group that they appointed, I was on that group too, which is how it was going to be done, and that's worked out pretty well. But that group, then they appointed some people who really understood the problem. And the first group were very nice and very bright people, but there weren't any environmentalists among them. And my wife's an environmentalist. I'm just an enabler. But we couldn't have kept that going. So that probably was, if anyone remembers the kinds of things I did, I think that might be the one.
Well, people don't always think about the long-term effects of things when they're in the throes of approving a project or developing something. And what I'm hearing you say is that you're looking at the long term, things like parks, open space, cleanliness of the water system, and the long-term effect of that. All of those things are so vitally important. And yet, it's amazing that if we don't focus on them right when that development is happening, then later it's just too late to do much about it.
Absolutely. There've been, you can't see everything that's going to happen, so you can't be sure. But I do think, um, you know, I always talk about maximum community input into these decisions. I particularly always ask, even if we got a situation now, I always ask, what do the most immediate neighbors want done? What is their problem? If you got to talk to them first. I don't necessarily say they always know what they want. There are NIMBYs, and they don't really count. But you have to take them into consideration, and then take in a lot of the larger picture down the line. And it takes study, and other civic activists. I always recommend read the ordinances, understand the legal situation in which you are, look at all the details, like, did they stick the development in the wrong place and things like that. I also believe that there's something to be said for some humor in this. I once, one of the developers' lawyers here, who's a longtime acquaintance of mine, came up with a plan. It looked like he was for downtown, and kind of a blighted area in downtown Alexandria, and the picture looked a little like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And so I got up and had a picture of the Wizard of Oz, and compared the lawyer to the wizard, and said, just look at this picture. That's Oz.
Behind the curtain.
Yeah, behind the curtain. So a little humor doesn't hurt. And particularly when I I testified dozens of times before the Planning Commission and before the council. And if possible, I try to have some humor and approach it without being excessively irascible.
Well, it breaks the tension.
Yes.
When people are all uptight about everything, if you can throw something in there that kind of breaks the tension, I think it really helps. What I think back on your story, when they were going to have that effective 2040,
yes,
I'm thinking, looking at your age and my age, we're probably about the same age. I'm thinking,
you're much younger.
Well, probably not much. But anyway, they're probably thinking, yeah, he won't be around in 2040. I don't need to worry about him then.
Well, no question. But the EPA had actually been working on a lot of cities on this. Now, in this case, it was not the federal EPA. It was the Virginia state EPA that had told them that they had to fix these outfalls, but they only put the mandate on the two smaller ones and let the city get away with actually, what would I say, a misstatement, a misstatement about the big one. I find often that the city is able to sort of to bamboozle the state. And that's, in some cases I don't mind, and in some cases I do. So we'll see. But anyway, they are now in the midst of building a huge tunnel that's going to go miles, that's going to carry this outflow water, hold it for a while, let the sediments come out of it, and then put it into the Potomac. Probably right now, the city staff wanted to be responsible for all of this, but we have a private water treatment organization called Renew, and Renew puts nothing but pure water back in the Potomac. They won't, their policy is they have to. And were in they had the technical background where the city did not. And so some of us really pressed for this Renew to do the job, and they got the job. The city finally capitulated and said they could do it. It's a quasi-public utility, and I know it's going to cost more than anybody thought, but it's going to take care of the problem, and they think they can get it finished by 2025. I'm not sure I won't be finished by 2025, but who knows? No, it could be. It's we're doing pretty well in the coronavirus, although as a result of it, I'm feeling a little frustrated that I'm called on for counseling from time to time on some of these issues, and I don't feel as au courant on some of this as I should, because I can't get out and talk to people and about what's going on. You got on this trolley and you can't get off.
Well, we're just going to have to make a little more time on handling things a different way. You know, if you can get a group of people together and talk to them over Zoom, you know, you might be able to accomplish as much as if you would go out on a one-to-one.
Yeah, well, we had the Seminary Hill Association, which was working, basically we're working on a stream restoration that is very controversial. We did it by Zoom the other day, and while it was fine, it worked out pretty well, what I miss is the chance to go over to someone, grab their ear and say, now, what do you know about this? And quite quietly. I mean, that's part of the whole way of doing things, is to get bits of information, get as much as you can. Don't get too public until you're really sure you got your story together.
Yeah, that's true. I have one last question to ask you. What are some of the things that you'd say to the new generation of leaders if you have their attention? And you probably do, because you know you're talking about things that are important to a lot of the younger generation as well. What would you say to them?
Well, a couple of things I say to them is do your homework. I mean, we really have. I'm on one of these. What do they call them? It's called next door. It's next door Jordan Street, which is the next street over from my house, but it takes in a huge area, and there are other groups that get together. There's various things, and a lot of, what would I say, half-baked ideas come roaring out of them, and misinformation. And I would say, be sure of your facts. And I've made mistakes that way, and they've always been very embarrassing. But you've got to do your homework and read carefully what's on the papers, what seems to be the law, what seems to be the ordinance, what precedent is in the city. Is fully. And what do those most immediately affected think? And before you begin to put together a policy that you would like others to follow.
And you may find, if you look closely enough and do your homework, that the building is on the wrong piece of land.
Yeah, right on top of a park. That's right. I mean, in that instance, I accepted what the association must have had a lot of. By that time, I'd won a fight or two, and they must have had a lot of faith in me. And I still remember standing up after they had voted to have me do this, saying, "Well, I'll do my best, but I cannot promise we can defeat this. This is, pretty formidable stuff." And and then it just sort of turned out to be a lot easier than I thought. So, you know, it's the whole, you know, being a civic activist does have some responsibility. I mean, you've got to take into account not just your own predilections and maybe self-interest, although your own self-interest is a powerful force to getting you to do something, but to look at the bigger picture as you can and see where you can. I'm a political scientist. You haven't mentioned that. I have a degree in political science, and there's a thing called interest aggregation. And one of the things that you try to do is to get people of different points of view, different backgrounds, to aggregate their interests to say, this is why you should be interested, and that's why you should be interested, and bring together a coalition. That's very important. You mentioned that earlier, not just one individual, but bringing together a group, and that's highly important. And often is, you know, takes work, and you have to listen to other people, see what they think. It's you know, there are a lot of what I call hot dogs out there who don't do that, and who then raise a lot of ruckus and nothing ever happens. So that's what I sort of would give. And I've been a little worried that there are a lot of people, if you haven't been in this, I mean, I've been at this since in the late 70s in the city, and have all this, what would I say, background memory and knowledge. And there are a lot of people who are there. These folks are working hard. They're architects, or they're doctors, or they're lots of different kinds of occupations, but they don't pay attention to this all the time. So it becomes kind of mysterious to them. And I've been worried that our association doesn't have any, hasn't had, but a couple of people recently have come to the fore who are really, really, really good, really good. And I'm very pleased, because I'm fading off the picture, and out of the, I take on very few of these issues anymore as a result.
But the good part is that you have a legacy, and you have left a mark that is so important to that future we talked about. You know, when you're talking about clean water, it's long term. That's the future. When you're talking about open space and parks, like you're responsible for on the development side, that's the future. And that's the legacy that's so important to what you have done.
Well, that's interesting. You're echoing the recent. We have a woman city attorney. She's new on the job, but I've known her. She's been in the office. I've known her, and I like her a lot. And we opposed each other on a recent issue, and I didn't like the way she was approaching it. But she said, you know, I have just always admired your stalwart attitude toward your neighborhood and your area. And I've tried to be a little bigger than that, to also be a stalwart for Alexandria. And but I was very, very flattered and pleased with her commentary.
Well, you have made a difference. And thank you so much for participating with us today.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I hope that this all comes out well for you.
It shall.
Okay. Good to talk to you. And I'm going to tell my wife I caught your accent.